Irish Catholic Nationalist Republicans can work with British Protestant Unionist Loyalists together within Northern Ireland, within 6 counties. That's one strand of our peace process. It's known as power sharing or power sharing. Power sharing, yes, or consociationalism is the fancy word for it. When everybody sits around the same table, depending on what your background is, and you decide that you're better coming together to govern yourself. That's one aspect of our peace-building process. The second and very important aspect for Irish people is the North-South dimension. The idea that the people of Ireland in the South have a right to be involved in the peacemaking process with the people who identify as Irish in the North. So you have this North-South dimension, the internal dimension, and then you have a British, UK-wide, and an Irish dimension. Okay, so the complexities there are really important in terms of how we build our peace. Then you need to identify who's going to be able to sort out the peace, who's going to be able to be involved, who are the actors that you need to bring around the table. They are the many political groups, they are the different governments of the United Kingdom and of Ireland, but also lots of factions, lots of organisations that have been involved in violent conflict and have moved beyond violent conflict into the political arena. They are all involved in the peacemaking process. And then finally, you need to give a sense of empowerment as to what this peacemaking process is going to look like. And when we signed our peace agreement in 1998, that's 20 years ago, we signed our peace agreement 20 years ago, it was supported almost universally by all Irish nationalists, or Irish Catholic Nationalist Republicans in the North, and almost half of the British Protestant Unionists supported the peace agreement. So it wasn't a peace agreement that was universally supported by everyone. Okay, it didn't get full acceptance by everyone, but it got enough acceptance to make sure that there was the energy to set up a government in Northern Ireland. And importantly, the people of Ireland on the whole, 32 counties north and south, passed their acceptance of the proposal by 90+%, almost 95%. So these are the different steps that came about, or that took place to build our peace in Northern Ireland. Okay? Now, I've highlighted a couple of identity issues because I think these remain really important issues in our current everyday life in the north of Ireland. We have a shared identity. We are all from the same to bash the other group with, right? So Irish Republicans, you've maybe heard of the political organisation Sinn Féin. Oh, yeah. Sinn Féin are saying we want a freestanding Irish Language Act. We want a piece of legislation that protects the Irish language for Irish speakers across the island of Ireland, to make sure that their rights to language are protected. And this is causing all sorts of chaos. It's one of the major reasons why we don't have a power sharing agreement in place. It's one of the major reasons that we don't have a functioning government in place at this moment in time. So it just goes to show how important identity politics remain in contested spaces like Northern Ireland. This is an example of a street sign in Belfast.
What's the name of the Irish language?
Ascailga. Yeah, Irish language, Gaelic. Yeah. And this is an example of street signs in Belfast where you have English and then underneath Irish. And there's a real fear amongst certain aspects and certain sections of the Protestant Unionist community that the entire city of Belfast is going to be overrun with Irish signs and overrun with Irish legislation, which isn't going to happen. But it just is something that really makes them emotionally very charged. And then the second major issue of our day, Brexit. Okay? Brexit has done more to advance the cause of a united Ireland than the IRA did in 30 years of armed conflict. Controversial statement, right? Very hyperbolic statement. But at the same time, right, People are genuinely terrified as to what Brexit looks like for the island of Ireland. Okay? And the day after, remember I go all the way back to the very beginning and I showed you the 2 passports, and I showed you that I can have both. That's a great luxury, I'm very aware of that. But it's also something that Irish people, if they're very, very Irish, would not even dream of having a UK passport. No way. And at the same time, British people would not even dream of having an Irish passport. That's like selling out. That is like saying I'm part of the other side, part of the enemy. However, the day after Brexit, and the weeks after Brexit, and the months after Brexit, there were almost 75,000 applications from British, Protestant, Unionist, Loyalist people to apply for an Irish passport. So just how quickly was it that identity politics shifted when it became around the issue of Brexit? So this is really interesting as well. And even some of the most hardline, staunch British Unionist politicians, people like Ian Paisley Jr., have made applications for an Irish passport. So it's very interesting, and it will be interesting to see a piece of land, the same 6 counties. We have shared common heritage, we have shared histories, and we have shared experiences in different conflicts. But in terms of community identity in Northern Ireland, as I mentioned to you before, your identity and your upbringing shapes your social engagement. Right? So where you are from and what community you ascribe to be a part of dictates what you end up doing socially, dictates what church you go to, what education you're brought up in. And it also limits the amount of acceptable interaction with the other. It's not always universally accepted that people will equally go across different communities and engage in shared activities. They're not always popular. Okay? I've shared two pictures here because I think they're interesting. The first one on the bottom here is an Irish passport and a British passport. Under the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, one of our crucial strands was to say that I can be Irish, that I can be British, that I can be Northern Irish, that I can be British, Irish, Northern Irish, or that I can be none. And that's really important because it allows me to say that as a citizen of the 6 counties in Northern Ireland, I consider myself to be Irish. Equally, somebody else might say, as a citizen of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, I consider myself to be British. And that's okay, and that's an important aspect of our peace agreement. And in fact, that is written into our legislation. It is one of the cornerstones of what we set out to do. I think in terms of how identity politics have shaped violence, I think it's really important for you to know that violence has been perpetrated through identification and identity politics. So people have engaged with violence on the basis that their most important affiliation is to Ireland, or their most important affiliation is to the UK. And violence has been perpetrated in those names. But as I say, it's not really that straightforward. I've presented it as a very straightforward argument. You're either British or you're Irish, and it's not that straightforward, because national identifications rise and fall over time. And what you see is that a lot of our younger generations are saying very comfortably, no, you're okay, are saying very comfortably that they're very happy to be Northern Irish. So this is a rising new sense of personal identity that has come through as a result of our peace agreement. So the younger generations that are coming through are happy to say, I'm a little politics maybe towards the United Kingdom. You have an Irish identity and an Irish heritage, and that is very much something to be proud of. And that is a real example of transcending this identity politics. That's the positive. They come together is a little bit problematic, because it means that there's always a sense of bargaining, a sense of one person's loss is another person's gain. And in political terms, when it comes to building peace and embedding our fragile peace, that can be very difficult. We now have a sense that the most extreme parties are those parties with the strongest ethno-national identities, the most Irish Republican Nationalist Party and the most British Unionist Loyalist parties are now those parties that hold the balance of power. They are now the most influential parties in our government. And I think that's bad. I think that's a negative thing. Yeah.
But with the great, I mean, I can understand what you're saying, but for them being on the extreme side is part of their, because of their losses. Their involvement in the conflict and the burden of the share of losses that they have had shifted them to be on the opposite far side of the peace agreement.
I think that's probably
And,
right.
and one other thing, the Friday Agreement maybe, I think, maybe the approach that was followed, taking a conflict resolution instead of transforming the conflict into a better way, led to the status quo currently. And I think also the British involvement was not really that powerful in order to support the agreement more. It was the involvement of the US more way maybe.
Possibly. Possibly. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, we're being critical of the fact that extreme parties hold the balance of power, but at the same time, you're better having extreme parties at the negotiating table. You're better having them agreeing and being involved in strategies and discussions, and I totally accept that. The problem is the way in which our government works is we have segregated politics. One side of the community is responsible for health, the other side of the community is responsible for education, the other side of the community is responsible for agriculture, the other side of the community, etc., etc. And there's always this bargaining that goes on back and forth, and that is actually a problem, because what it means is that in terms of how decisions are taken, one side can veto the other side all the time, and so decisions don't get made. And that is why, in many ways, we don't have a government now. So even though this is a great peace agreement, 20 years on, we don't have a government. So we need to think about the reasons why. See how Brexit really shapes people's identities, and because I really do believe that this will advance the cause of unification of the island as a whole, and that will throw up a whole new series of questions as to how does Ireland, as a country, as 32 counties, how does Ireland embrace the fact that there is a significant minority on the island that ascribe or consider themselves British? How does Ireland think about that? And I don't think it has thought about that enough. I don't think it has done enough by way of reaching out to the unionist community and saying, we want you to be politically represented in our government, in our all-Ireland structures. So that is a major issue that we believe, and everybody who's working on these type of issues believe is coming shortly down the road. So that is the question. Are identity wars the new phase of our conflict? Have we gone beyond direct engagement, beyond physical violence, beyond the peace-building phase, and have conflict, and our identity wars our new phase of our conflict? That's just a question. I don't know. I don't really know the answer. But I would just throw a couple of points at the end here. Polarization of commemoration, culture and tradition is a major feature of our post-conflict environment. Separate identities are a major feature of our post-1998 agreement. Okay? A political victory for one is viewed as a defeat for the other, and that is a problem, and that is inhibiting progress. There is a lack of acceptance. There's a painful ignorance on both sides of the community as to their joint heritage. Okay? People need to realise that if you go one generation back or two generations back, the chances are there's a mix of blood and heritage and religion and identity in your own family. And not enough people know that. Okay? They just fall on more traditional lines. And then, of course, these issues around identity politics are the issues that have collapsed our government. These are so important for the people of Northern Ireland that they have ultimately led to a downfall in our ability to govern ourselves. And as such, I think they need to be given really important consideration. Garamia, thank you very much. Please, I need to do something. And sometimes we pay too much attention to the older generations that perhaps become a little bit entrenched in their bigotry and in their segregation. And there are obviously exceptions to that. But I think if you were to look at a lot of the younger generations who are now far more liberal, far more willing to embrace their multiplicity of identities, far more able to say, I'm Irish, Northern Irish, British, I like cricket, football, Gaelic, tennis, hurling, all these sports and identities that are attributed to one side or the other. That's really inspiring, and that makes us think that something might be changing. As I said, people do actually say, I'm Northern Irish. I'm actually from Northern Ireland. I don't personally, but a lot of people do. Now, there's a caveat to that, of course. People who come from certain backgrounds are more likely to say that they're Northern Irish, and there is actually a link between socioeconomic deprivation and more stronger feelings of ethno-national identity. Okay, so the people that come from poorer areas of urban spaces in Northern Ireland, poorer areas of Belfast, or areas where the two communities collide or interface, are more likely to say they are strongly Irish or strongly British. However, if you come from a more middle class, wealthy, affluent background, you've been exposed to more opportunities to meet people of different sides, you're more likely to then say, you know, I have a plural identity or lots of identities. So the issue of class should not be underestimated in all of this.
Right.
And then, of course, what does Britishness mean? Right? What does Britishness mean in Ireland? It's a very different concept to be from Britain in Ireland than it is to be very British and in England. So if people in England, for example, think that people who consider themselves British in Northern Ireland, they think that's very weird, that's strange, that's odd, and they can't identify with that notion of Britishness. So Britishness means different things to different people who grew up across the UK and Ireland. Two cases that I wanted to throw up for discussion for you. One is the Irish language. This has become the political battle of our time currently. At this moment in time, there has been a growing push to promote the Irish language. And Irish language is not widely spoken in Northern Ireland. Not that many people speak it in the south of Ireland, okay, but it is still an official language. There is a growing amount of people wanting to learn Irish. It is the language of the native people. It is an important aspect of our cultural identity, but it is also a political bargaining chip. It is being used and abused by political parties in the north of Ireland to see how they might try and gain extra political capital against the other. But there's a success story in all that. The largest and fastest growing Irish language school in Northern Ireland is run by a Protestant, British, UK political individual. Right? Just to confuse it all further, right? Just to make it seem even more crazy, Linda Irvine is the sister of David Irvine. David Irvine was a loyalist, Protestant, UK paramilitary, was in a paramilitary organisation, became a political figure for the Protestant working class people of Belfast, and now his sister is involved in the fastest growing Irish language school in Belfast. Isn't that amazing? I think that's quite impressive. Now her story is unbelievable. She set up this Irish language school in Protestant East Belfast. You've probably been there, Nahi. In the heart of Protestant Unionist East Belfast. When she set up her Irish language school, she received death threats bullets in the post. There were bricks through her window. They set fire to her car. They called her a sellout. They called her all the names of the day, as you can imagine. And yet she still persisted. And now what you have is Protestants identifying that Irish to identify as either a British party or an Irish party. Okay? Even the parties that say we're a little bit of both, we're a hybrid party, we have a mixture, our political support comes from lots of different identities, you're still required by law in the north of Ireland to say whether or not you're a British party or an Irish party. And that causes problems. That causes a lot of difficulties when it comes to actually governing Northern Ireland. And that has led to a lot of critique about the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement. Even though internationally and globally we're put on this pedestal and we're said, this is the way to build peace. And in many ways it is. Northern Ireland is a markedly safer place to grow up, right? It is a markedly safer place to live. I was born in 1986. When I was born, the conflict was still very live. There was lots of issues. There were still bomb scares. We still had a ring of steel around the city centre. We still had checkpoints. We still had all the infrastructures and apparatuses of the conflict. Whereas we don't have any of that now. So I think it's important that I say all that because I'm going to be quite dismissive of our peace agreement, and yet I still very much value the core tenets of our peace agreement because it is a markedly safer place to grow up, and that's important. I think last year I was a bit negative, and I think some of you told me I was a bit negative. Yeah, a little bit, but that's okay. That's okay. Maybe I've softened in a year, but that's fine. But I think
You are changing your
my
identity politics.
I'm just saying my identity shifted, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think it's important to know that the 1998 peace agreement came at a time of great uncertainty, right? Came at a time where people just had to stop. We just needed to put in place an agreement that would stop people killing each other. And so it's obviously imperfect. It's obviously slightly flawed. And it's with the benefit of hindsight, 20 years on, that you can look at it and you can say, maybe we embedded differences too much. Maybe we didn't pay enough attention to the identity politics that are going to shape the 20 years on. Maybe we didn't think more about what we need to do for victims and survivors. Okay? Because they've been largely left out of the narrative of building peace in Northern Ireland. Maybe we didn't think more about those intangible things that still create conflict, like flags, like symbols, like protests, like commemorations, like memory. And all these things are intangible, of course, but when they flare up, they seem to be the things that cause the most difficulty in the present day. Our peace agreement forced opposing parties to come together. Possibly a good thing, but at the same time, the manner in which they...
The peace agreement actually defragmented or fragmented more the society than it was in the conflict time.
I mean, there is an argument to be put forward for that. Yes, it has in many ways polarized our society more. More people are voting on the extremes than they did before. And the way we know that is when we look at voting trends. The more moderate parties in the middle, the moderate nationalist from the Catholic side and the moderate unionist from the Protestant side, those parties were the parties that made the peace agreement. Right? Those parties are now the parties that almost no longer exist. They're gone. They're nearly finished. And I think that's very interesting, and we should pay attention to that. So the point is, there is very little political space now in Northern Ireland for parties that don't align to one side or the other to thrive. Okay? We don't have a strong sense of a non-community identity aligned party that has a great sense of power. And that has caused lots of problems. And this is backed up by evidence. This isn't just me saying this, by the way. It's not just something I thought up and decided to talk about. But actually looking at electoral studies, looking at social studies, looking at political attitude studies, right? These studies are done every year. It's called the Northern Ireland Life and Times Study, or the Young Life and Times Study for people under the age of 18. they actually show us that Northern Irish society has become far more polarised. There's also evidence to say that cross-community contact between Protestants and Catholics has slowly deteriorated over time. That's just what the facts, that's just what the studies are telling us. And there are sporadic acts of violence that happen that keep communities divided, and those are linked to the separate identities that we're talking about. So these are our current political power-sharing partners. I don't think they seem too happy in this picture, right? They don't look like you could drive a bus in between them, right? But when you compare this to what I showed you last year, I don't expect you to remember, but I showed you a picture of Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley, and it was all ha 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 ha, chuckle chuckle, pat in the back. And that was very extreme. That was the embodiment of extremism in our society, coming together and trying to make some kind of governance. This is where we're at now. Okay? And as I said, the post-conflict generation is a very interesting case study. It's a very interesting group to sort of examine, because it is how their identity is shifting over time that is really of more interest to me. I don't really care what the 65-year-olds say. They're going to die soon. What I care about is the people that are coming through next, because they're the people that are actually going to embed our little bit British. I'm a little bit Irish. And when you mix the two together, I'm Northern Irish. So you have this new identity that comes through, and that's really interesting. The other key point is that all Unionists are not simply British, okay? That's a bit confusing, okay? They're not simply British nationalists. They feel like they are more comfortable within the United Kingdom, but they're also very comfortable with the fact that they have Irish heritage. And that's really important. And again, not all Catholics believe in a united Ireland. Not all Catholics want Ireland to be reunified. And that's where it gets complicated. My wife works in the National Health Service in the UK, or in Northern Ireland. She's from an Irish Republican family, very strong Irish Republican identity. But if I was to say to her, do you want to live in a 32-county all-Ireland structure? She would probably say no at this stage, because she doesn't believe that a 32-county all-Ireland structure would be beneficial for healthcare, because I think it's widely accepted that the NHS, for all its faults, provides free healthcare to citizens in Northern Ireland, whereas it doesn't in the South. So not all Catholics believe in a united Ireland. That's just one little example. The other thing is that the UK and Ireland have been traditionally quite apathetic and disinterested in Northern Ireland, and I think that's fair to say as well. The UK has had an approach where it's tried to slowly get out of Northern Ireland for the last X amount of years. We are a massive drain on the UK economy. More money is pumped in per head to people living in Northern Ireland than it is in England, Scotland or Wales. So the UK government sees Northern Ireland as a bit of an inconvenience, and I think a lot of Irish politicians in the South have not been as vocal or as strong about the notion of all-Ireland reunification as perhaps Irish Catholic Nationalist Republicans in the North would have liked. So apathetic states have played a part. But the problem with our peace agreement and the problem with identity politics in Northern Ireland is that our peace agreement has arguably led to an inseparability between identity and good politics. Everything is now done on the basis of identity. All our political arrangements are now based on on whether or not you're Irish Catholic or whether or not you're British Protestant. And we'll talk about that in a short period of time. Every one of our political parties in the north of Ireland is required by law to how you go about building peace. And whereas that is important, and I accept that, there are lots of very interesting aspects of how we built our peace process. It is in many ways an imperfect peace. Okay? And depending who you speak to, some people are more critical and more cynical than others. You could refer to Northern Ireland as a uncomfortable peace, or that people in Northern Ireland are comfortably segregated, because we live very separate lives. We grew up together separately, we go to separate schools, we go to separate churches, we don't tend to socialise in the same spaces, and all of these issues coalesce around identity. So Irish people tend to come together and share different aspects of their life, come together to enjoy different sports, different religious activities, different social activities, and it's the same for British people who tend to do that as well. But let's just look at how the peace came about. First of all, who was in conflict in Northern Ireland? Who was actually in a conflict? Because that's important. It was two communities. Two communities separately living side by side in Northern Ireland. The Catholic community, Irish, Catholic, Republican, Nationalist. All these words tend to mean variants of the same thing. Okay? On one hand, Irish, Catholic, Nationalist, Republican. And then on the other hand, it was British, Protestant, Unionist, Loyalist, right? Okay? Have I confused you yet? No? But all these separate identities kind of are the two areas that came in conflict with each other. So it was the communities themselves that were in conflict. One aspect. The second aspect is, in some sense, there was tension between the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland. The south of Ireland, known as the Republic of Ireland, of which Jonathan is our representative in the room, the Republic of Ireland, versus the north of Ireland, which remains part of the United Kingdom, okay, in a sort of jurisdictional way, in a sense that its governance is out of Westminster in London and not out of Dublin and the Dáil. And that's interesting and important when we talk about how peace was built. So we've got communities in conflict, we've got the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland having a bit of tension and a bit of conflict, and then of course there's a bit of tension between the UK, the rest of the UK, and Ireland. So there's many dimensions to this conflict and many actors in the conflict. So today I've been asked to come in and give a little bit of an insight into the issue of contested identities, as it says, in Northern Ireland, because this is a major issue in terms of building peace in my neck of the woods, where I'm from. The issue of identity politics is kind of one of these central concerns that we're currently trying to deal with in terms of making our peace stick, making our peace become more embedded. Because at this moment in time, the peace in Belfast and the peace in Northern Ireland is very precarious. It's very uncertain. We don't have a government at the moment. Things are not great. And that means that all these issues around identity resurface and cause us some problems. So that's why I've been asked to come and speak here, and I'm absolutely delighted to do that. So, identity in Northern Ireland. Is everybody familiar with the fact that Northern Ireland is made up of 6 counties? 6 small areas of the whole island of Ireland make up the state of Northern Ireland. And within Northern Ireland you have 2 very strong separate ethno-national identities. There are people that want to be Irish, and then there are people that want to be British. And it is that intersection, it is where those 2 issues come together that a lot of our conflict manifests itself and becomes very apparent. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and do a number of things. First of all, I'm going to talk about the steps that we took to bring about peace. I think that's important. We need to refresh our mind about that. Then I'm going to highlight some of the identity issues that were at play during the process of making peace. And then I'm going to highlight some of the identity issues that remain very significant in terms of trying to make the peace stick. Okay.